Okay, so let's try and unpack.
Right.
We're going to do a deep dive on a situation that, I mean, it's really exposed some of the complex fault lines in modern.
It really has.
I'm talking about the upcoming purge of the 2018 reboot, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
Mm-hmm.
The show is officially slated for removal from Netflix in February 2020.
And for a huge part of its fan base, a very vocal part, this is being treated as like a profound betrayal.
Yeah, they see it as losing this culturally essential piece of art.
I think you have the industry analysts, and for them, it's just a textbook example of an expired licensing agreement.
Exactly. And that's our mission today, right? To get past the rhetoric.
All of it. The fan outrage, the political stuff, the really charged discourse.
And really understand the cold business reality that decides the stream fate.
Yeah, and we've pulled some critical nuggets from our sources here, really detailing that intersection of high-stakes streaming strategy.
Right.
This super complicated IP management. We have to talk about Mattel and DreamWorks.
Oh, we will.
And just the extreme volatility of modern fan culture.
It's a clash of two worlds. It really is. On one side, you have the emotional value of this identity-driven content.
And on the other,
the brutal financial metrics of net value add.
And this is the initial sort of crucial takeaway we want you, the listener, to absorb right from the top.
What is it?
This removal, it was not a surprise, not at all.
Not if you were paying attention.
Anyone who understood the contracts, the initial deal between Netflix and DreamWorks Animate knew this clock.
The second that license expires, the content it enters what you could call the streaming Bermuda Triangle.
Limbo.
Exactly, limbo.
See, this is the difference between art and asset management. This wasn't some creative termination.
Yep.
It was a scheduled contractual end date. The real insight we can get from the source is understanding that specific financial calculation. Why was the clock allowed to run out?
Why wasn't it worth renewing?
Exactly. And that tells us everything we need to know about the show's performance and its perceived long-term value.
Okay, so let's nail down the specifics first. The sources all confirm the date. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power is scheduled to leave Netflix on February 21st, 2026.
Right.
But what makes it so concrete is the nature of the deal itself. Can you walk us through what happens when a big co-production agreement like this just hits its expiration date?
Sure. So this falls into a category that's often called licensed original.
Okay.
Netflix had this massive production deal with DreamWorks Animation. It started way back in 2013, got renewed a few times.
Yeah, I remember that.
It meant Netflix financed and distributed a huge slate of DreamWorks shows. But, and this is the key, they didn't own the underlying IP.
Which stayed with DreamWorks, or in this case, the ultimate owner was Mattel.
Precisely. And those deals, they have defined windows, 5, maybe 8 years. The 2018 She-Ra is just hitting the end of its contractual run. Simple as that.
And this is crucial because it kind of neutralizes that fan theory that Netflix is somehow specifically targeting She-Ra for its progressive theme. This isn't an isolated event.
Not even close. Our sources are really explicit about this. It's a sweeping clearance of licensed DreamWorks content.
He mentioned another one.
They did. They cite Kipo and The Wonder Beast as a prime example. Another well-regarded, identity-focused show that's also facing...
So it's heading into that same contractual limbo.
Exactly. When a massive portfolio license like this expires, you don't just renew it piece by piece, not unless a specific title is like a massive outlier in performance.
Which makes the showrunner's perspective here incredibly illuminating.
Andy Stevenson.
Yeah, Andy Stevenson, who helmed the reboot, they put out a public statement that was, very measured. I'd almost argue it was designed to manage fan action.
Oh, completely. It was a masterclass in professional detachment.
It felt like they were trying to preempt the backlash they knew was coming.
Stevenson acknowledged the reality. They said, this has happened to a bunch of DreamWorks shows. And then they said something really sad.
What was that?
Something like, years of hard work by many talented crews have ended up without a home.
Wow.
And that line is so crucial because it shows they get it. They understand the volatility of the streaming model, where creative output is often just temporary.
But the real core of their message, the part I found most telling, was the appeal to the fan. Stevenson explicitly said that showrunners have no control over. They were genuinely pleading with fans, don't harass us, don't demand we do something.
What does that tell you about the power dynamic between creators and platforms today?
There isn't one.
Pretty much. Creators working on major IP are, for all intents and purposes, contract.
Hired guns.
Exactly. They're hired to execute a vision within a defined financial window. Once that last episode is delivered, their control just ends completely.
So the show's fate is decided by lawyers, by financial projections.
By licensing departments. Stevenson knew that trying to fight this was like trying to stop the tide. They were publicly washing their hands of a problem they couldn't solve.
And doing it to protect themselves and their staff from the fan aggression they knew was inevitable.
100%.
So let's transition to that, the cold business rationale. This is the real lesson for anyone studying media today. Why do services like Netflix treat content they financed and marketed just a few years ago as expendable?
Well, one source used the word junk.
A very provocative word. How is a finished, delivered asset considered junk if it doesn't meet certain metrics?
This is where we have to get into the weeds of something called net value add, or NVA.
Oh, break that down for us.
For a streaming service, every single piece of content is an investment, but that investment has to be constantly justified. The primary reasons for the removal are, like we said, the deal is up, but more critically, it is not worth renewing.
But what does not worth renewing mean in a measurable way? It's not just a gut feeling from an exec.
Oh, absolutely not. It's highly, highly quantified.
How so?
When they consider renewing something, a streamer like Netflix has to calculate the marginal subscriber retention for that show.
Okay.
And weigh that against the cost of renewal.
So think of it like this. How many subscribers who are maybe thinking of canceling will decide to stay just because She-Ra is still available?
Exactly. If the cost of the next 7-year license is, let's say, $50 million.
Right.
But the show only retains, say, $10 million worth of subscribers who would have left otherwise.
Then the show is immediately in the red.
It's a financial liability.
So the logic is, if the show has been on the platform for 7 years, most people who wanted to see it or signed up because of it have already done so.
It's past its peak utility for bringing in new users.
Right.
And our sources were crystal clear on this. The show doesn't sell enough. The argument is very direct.
Yeah.
A series that critics were dismissively calling a 7-year-old Tumblr cartoon.
And we should be clear, we're using that term to report the critical stance, not endorse it.
That kind of show just won't bring in a significant number of new subscribers.
And new subscribers are the holy grail. That is the main metric for growth in the streaming wars.
It's everything. Old content that doesn't have massive perpetual viewership like, what Wolf of Friends used to.
Becomes a liability.
A financial liability just waiting to be written down.
And that ties into this whole strategy of content write-downs, doesn't it? It's not just about saving on license. It's about cleaning up the balance sheet.
That is the accounting reality. Streaming companies regularly assess the carrying value of their content if a show isn't likely to generate enough future revenue.
Through renewals or merch or new subscribers.
To cover its sunk costs plus any future licensing fees, it's better to just remove it and write down the remaining value.
It cleans up the financial ledger as much as space on the platform.
And there's a practical physical component to this too, right?
Yeah.
Related to capacity and just overall strategy.
What do you mean?
Well, content acquisition is a zero-sum game. Netflix is constantly making massive new deals. They need the bandwidth.
As one of the sources noted, they need to make room for all this Warner Brothers stuff they're going to flush.
That right there highlights that the entire industry is in this state of flux. Content is fungible. When major studios like Warner Bros., Discovery start recalling their IP for their own platforms, like Max.
Or when big licensing deals expire, massive purges just become necessary.
You have to do it to maintain a manageable, financially efficient content library. This content impermanent. It's the new normal.
So to sum up this first section, we've got a scheduled exit date, an exhaust strategic value, and a showrunner who knows better than to try and fight the spread.
That's the long and short of it.
Okay, so now we have to We're moving from the cold reality of the CFO's office to the fiery, emotional reality of the core fans.
And this removal news triggered, massive, immediate.
The core audience, which the sources often call she-res, or more generally shippers.
Because of their intense focus on romantic pairings, yeah.
They are reportedly having melt.
And the response went far beyond just typical internet disappointment.
Yeah.
This is where we really need to slow down and look at the intensity of the reaction.
It's almost disproportionate to the news of a show just moving platforms.
Almost.
The sources have some genuinely shocking and emotional anecdotes that really illustrate this fervor.
Like the user who is quoted as being so fucking upset because the show saved my life in 2019.
And that phrasing, saved my life, it's not hyperbole in this context. It reflects a really deep personal connection.
For a lot of viewers, especially those who identify with the show's LGBTQ theme, this content was a crucial piece of cultural validation.
So when the media is removed, it feels like that validation, that safe space, is being physically threatened.
Exactly. And then on the other extreme, you get reactions that just hurtle into something truly offensive.
You're talking about the 9/11 comparison.
I am. We have a user who, in a completely hyperbolic and inappropriate comparison, said the removal was worse than 9/11.
That level of historical illiteracy is jarring, but it does show the raw emotional output.
It also tells us about the community's internal dialogue. Amidst all the outrage, fans were documented urging each other to become more lesbian than ever.
So they're tying the show's existence directly to their social and sexual identity.
The show wasn't just entertainment. It was a political and personal banner, and its removal is seen as an attack on that banner.
And this kind of extreme, highly defensive, identity-driven behavior, it's not unique to She-Ra, is it?
No, the hosts of our source material were very quick to point out that this is characteristic of the Steven Universe crowd and the Voltron crowd.
Right. These fandoms share a history of this kind of volatility.
They really do. These sagas are marked by intense online harassment. We saw it with Steven Universe, crew members getting threats for not having the right pairings.
And with Voltron, when characters were seen as being marginalized.
It's a pattern. And it's precisely why Andy Stevenson felt they had to preemptively ask fans to stop demanding action or resorting to harassment. The expectation that a platform will bend to fan is often, accompanied by these aggressive tactics.
This volatility brings us to a fascinating term. These fandoms tend to weaponize grifters.
Mm-hmm.
Fans frequently accuse critics, commentators, really anyone who offers a counter-narrative to their outrage of being a grifter.
A Disney grifter, She-Ra grifter, yeah.
The term has become completely unmoored from his action.
Oh, completely. As documented in the sources, the fan definition of a grifter is basically just somebody who doesn't like what I like.
So it's a mechanism. It's a way to invalidate any external criticism by just attributing it to malicious financial intent.
That's it. It's a shield.
So let's pivot and actually analyze the economics here. Media commentary versus action. If we use the real definition, someone who jumps from thing to thing they have no interest in just to make money. Where's the line in today's digital world?
Well, the line is thin, but it is observable. A genuine media analyst who monetizes their critique of a newsworthy event, even if it's a train wreck, is operating within the standard economic model of journalism.
They're generating engagement around a topic that's prominent in the cultural conversation.
Right. And our sources argue that under the fans' skew definition, literally every media outlet, from major newspapers to TV networks, would be a grifter if they commented on a controversial.
The real danger is when the fan base uses that term to just silence legitimate, especially critiques pointing out the show's commercial failure, like the low viewership we just talked about.
Exactly. It creates an echo chamber where any internal criticism is just rejected out of hand.
And here's the interesting counter-argument that the sources themselves posed.
Which is?
That the reboot arguably grifted off the old.
Ooh, that's a spicy take.
It took the iconic name She-Ra, all the nostalgia with Masters of the Universe, but delivered a radically different show that actively dismissed the original fan base.
So it capitalized on the established IP goodwill, but only to cater to a new niche audience.
And that sentiment feeds right into this concept of a locust fan. The sources argue this fan base is transient. They act like locusts who only swarm and care now because the content is leaving. They were there for the initial buzz, the identity validation, but not for the sustained support the show.
And the evidence of that transience is all over the place. This audience tends to move on very quickly to the next shiny, rainbow-colored something.
The sources mentioned they've already shifted focus to Has Been Hotel,
which speaks to the consumption-driven nature of digital attention. Once the novelty wears off or the validation, they move to the next thing that offers that same emotional reward.
And we have concrete evidence of this lack of sustained engagement, the very thing that caused the removal.
Right. Fans were openly admitting in the comments that they hadn't watched the show in 4 or 5 years.
But they were still outraged by the removal. The content was sitting there readily available for years, and they ignored it.
Until the threat of its loss created this artificial scarcity and urgency.
That paradox is the core business failure. The show failed because of low sustained viewership, but the fans only showed up when the viewing metric officially dropped to 0.
And that urgency, born from the fear of loss, immediately impacted their strategy for action.
Which brings us to the implications for act. In the wake of the news, what are the fans prioritizing?
They're immediately sharing Pirate Bay sites.
Illegally accessing the show. It demonstrates a desire for a permanence that streaming inherently denies.
And this is happening even though only the first 3 seasons ever got a physical DVD.
The whole series has never been available legally in a permanent physical format.
And the lesson there is just profound. Streaming promises infinite access, but it delivers impermanent lease. When the license expires, piracy steps in to fill the gap left by corporate contractual failure.
So the very fans who champion the show's themes are now rejecting the commercial model that funded it in the first place.
It's a fascinating contrast.
Okay, let's pivot to the content itself. Because the show's creative focus was the lightning rod that sparked so much attention and arguably contributed to the low overall appeal for a reboot.
Oh, absolutely. It faced intense criticism from day one about its priority.
The show was widely criticized for being hinged on identity politics.
Right, where critics argue the priority was representation over, say, cohesive world building or narrative loyalty to the original IP.
And this prioritization was often characterized by critics using some, say, derogatory shorthand, which we have to report neutrally.
Terms like focusing on the alphabet soup flag people.
Yeah, and that terminology just highlights the deep hostility of the online cultural debate that surrounded this show.
And our sources suggest there was an alleged creative mandate to gay it up a little bit more.
And to ensure everybody has to be great, which, according to critics, often had the strange side effect of making the male characters, especially the straight male characters, either marginalized, incompetent, or just annoying.
All to elevate the central female and queer cast.
What's fascinating is how far the final product supposedly deviated from...
The sources suggest that N.D. Stevenson's initial pitch was actually much closer to the classic 1980s.
So a recognizable update, something that would have appealed more to the existing ones while still bringing in new elements.
That's the claim, but the narrative shift was sharp.
And that change, according to, happened after some external, sometimes it's vaguely attributed Netflix.
A figure associated with the platform who was themselves part of the LGBTQ community.
Right, and the subsequent hiring of a writer's room that was heavily pop-Tumblr.
The claim is that these individuals pushed a hyper-specific agenda to ensure they were all represented and seen, and that this fundamentally altered the show's direction.
Which led to that strong focus on identity themes that defined the final product.
But the problem isn't the representation itself. It's the perceived cost of that representation, which often led to design choices that critics felt relied on stereotype.
Which, ironically, undercuts the show's own stated goals of diversity and inclusion.
Exactly.
Let's run through some of those controversial design examples that the sources cited, since they were so central to the show's reception.
Okay.
Starting with Bo.
Mm-hmm.
The original character was a white, male, kind of campy archer.
Right. The reboot version was allegedly race swapped. He's now a dark-skinned character.
Yeah.
And was explicitly given two dads.
And the criticism here was that this felt like a deliberate, almost cynical effort to just maximize represent checkboxes.
By changing the race and adding two fathers, the character was used to satisfy racial diversity requirements and LGBTQ representation in the supporting cast, all in one go.
Critics saw that as formulaic, not organic.
Right. Then you have Glimmer.
Okay, Glimmer. The original design was a very slender, conventionally beautiful white princess.
And in the redesign, she was made thick and vaguely ethnic. The critique there was severe. Many sources argued this was a calculated move to just avoid having a straight, white, thin female lead character in the show's main cast.
And this specific point generated some extreme, almost comical levels of fan reaction.
You're talking about the dolls.
We noted earlier, fans were publicly complaining that the officially released Glimmer dolls were not fat enough.
They were demanding the toy manufacturer adhere to the visual identity they saw on screen. It really shows the intense, almost proprietary relationship this audience has with the character's physical traits as identity markers.
And finally,
Frosta, yeah. The hosts detailed that to justify her ice and snow powers, Frosta had to look like she was Eskimo.
Critics jumped on that, arguing it was stereotyping and cultural appropriation.
Forcing a cultural identity onto a character purely for a visual shortcut to her powers, instead of just letting her be a fantasy creation.
They compared it unfavorably to other, like the controversial redesign of G.I. Joe's Snake Eyes.
The overarching criticism, as the sources summarized it, was that the show that aggressively preached against stereotypes ended up being painfully stupid because of its own reliance on visual shorthand and identity markers.
But maybe the biggest critical failure, the thing that really alienated the existing fan base, wasn't the content itself. It was the public relations strategy. Wow. A key reason for the show's failure with existing fans was that the marketing and PR was focused on attacking fans of the original show from day one.
Which is just an astounding strategy for a reboot.
The message was explicitly, it's not for you, it's for the new.
In commercial terms, that's just fundamentally counterproductive. You are borrowing a brand for its legacy value, but then you're actively insulting the established consumers of that legacy.
And the commentators argued that this approach was really stupid. I mean, if you're trying to launch a new show, you need every single viewer you can get.
To actively turn away a multi-generational audience, especially one that already owns the toys and knows the IP, you're just capping the show's commercial ceiling from the start.
The critical argument holds that if the show had just been its own unique IP,
like Best Friends Forever,
Warriors
of Magic or something,
Exactly. It wouldn't have been judged so harshly. You can do whatever you want with a brand new creation.
But as a reboot, it carries the baggage of the fans.
Yeah.
And if you actively go out of your way to disparage those fans, they're going to feel betrayed and reject the product.
We have a really chilling anecdote that illustrates the level of hostility this community generated.
What is it?
An artist was drawing the original White Mermista character, a minor character from the 1980s show. They were harassed online and accused of whitewashing the character.
Wait, let me get this straight. The artist was accurately drawing the version of the character that existed in the original IP.
The very IP the reboot was supposedly honoring.
And they were viciously attacked by the Shiris for not conforming to the new rebooted visual identity.
It's an incredible inversion, and that aggression fundamentally turned a lot of general sci-fi and fantasy fans away from the show entirely. It just reinforced the feeling that the community was closed off and hostile to outsiders, including older fans.
Okay, let's bring this back to the business end and talk about ownership, because this is the final nail in the coffin for the reboot.
Right.
The show was a Netflix DreamWorks co-production. Can you elaborate on why that structure, especially with the complications from the IP owner, Mattel, means the show can't just move to Peacock?
That's where most DreamWorks stuff usually goes.
Exactly.
Why not here?
The co-production status creates a legal minefield. If Netflix was just licensing the show from DreamWorks, then yeah, once the license expired, DreamWorks could easily move it to their corporate home, Peacock.
But because Netflix was a financing partner,
they likely retain certain distribution rights, holdback clauses, or some kind of financial participation that complicates any immediate redeployment by DreamWorks.
and then Mattel, as the ultimate IP owner, adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Because Mattel has its own strategic plan. It leaves the show firmly in limbo, just frozen between three major corporate entities.
And this entire mess stems from historical IP management error on Mattel's part. We have to break down the highly complicated nature of the He-Man and She-Ra license.
It is a fantastic business case study in short-sighted. Mattel was very short-sighted. Decades.
What happened?
When the properties went dormant, they split the license. They just didn't think they would ever need to use the characters again in an integrated way. So they structured the rights by media format or by character, which has since led to massive legal friction.
How does that split actually manifest in a contract? Can you give us a concrete example of how this limits character crossover in modern shows?
Sure. The fragmentation means that while core evil Horde characters like Hordak are considered fundamental to both Masters of the Universe and She-Ra properties.
So they can cross over relatively easily.
Right, because the rights were kept together. But other characters are siloed. Secondary characters that were heavily featured in the reboot, like Shadow Weaver, are specifically tied to the She-Ra license.
So to move Shadow Weaver into a Masters of the Universe property, like one of the Kevin Smith He-Man projects,
it would cost significantly more money. You'd need separate contractual negotiations and payments to the fragmented rights holder.
That structural fragmentation explains so much about the creative choices and the lack of Prince Adam or He-Man or even Castle Grayskull.
That's a direct consequence of these licensing restrictions.
He just couldn't afford it.
Absolutely. To feature Prince Adam or Grayskull extensively, the She-Ra production would have needed to trigger those costly MOTU rights clauses. The showrunners likely had a severely constrained budget for character integration.
So they were forced to build out the world of Etheria largely in isolation, instead of as an integral part of Eternity.
The IP budget dictated the creative, and that further alienated fans who were expecting a unified cosmology.
Now, let's look at Mattel's current public stand, because it speaks volumes about the commercial success of the reboot, or lack thereof.
They are making a very clear choice about which version of the Princess of Power they want to sell.
It seems like they're giving the 2018 reboot the corporate cold shoulder?
They are. Quite simply, they are not acknowledging its existence in their current marketing and merchandising strategy.
They're all in on classic.
Aggressively promoting and selling classic She-Ra merchandise. And the sources provide clear evidence that this is the commercially successful path. The classic doll sold out twice.
Which demonstrates persistent, viable consumer demand for the original design.
And the contrast with the merchandise strategy for the new show is stark. The dolls for the Netflix show had a very limited release and were almost immediately on clearance racks at places like Target.
And that's the ultimate metric of mass market appeal, isn't it?
The clearance bin. It suggests Mattel itself lacked confidence in the product's ability to move off the shelves at full price. It tells us that while the vocal core fan base loved the show, that love did not translate into broad consumer purchase.
The purchase is needed to sustain a profitable toy line, which is the fundamental reason She-Ra exists as an IP in the first place.
It's all about the toys.
So we have a show that is demonstrably failing to make money for the IP owner, and a license that is expiring. Where does the IP go next?
The source material offers some compelling speculation about the future home of the Masters of the Universe world.
What's the theory?
The sources suggest that the rights to the unified He-Man and She-Ra IP are consolidating and are potentially going to Amazon in 2026.
Which lines up perfectly with the Netflix removal date.
And it's tied to Mattel's ongoing plans for a major movie project, potentially bringing the two IPs back together under a single roof.
But what about the reboot specifically? If Amazon acquires the core IP, does that mean they automatically get Net?
Not necessarily. They might just choose to bury it and start fresh with a new version, especially given Mattel's current lack of support for the 2018 show.
The volatility here means that if the reboot does find another home, maybe on a niche platform like Tubi or something,
it might be 10 years down the road. This really just hammers home the impermanence of content created for streaming.
It's not archive content, it's leased software.
Well said.
Finally, let's address that emotional, philosophical objection the fan base raised about the removal.
Right.
One fan comment claimed the removal is alienation of people from their labor and that the art is the crew's very. It elevates the product to something protected under labor rights.
That perspective is heavily influenced by Marxist theories of alienation, treating the creative output as a worker's inherent property.
But we have to counter this with the commercial reality of large-scale IP production.
This show was not a personal pain. It was, at the end of the day, product. The hundreds of talented people involved signed contracts stating they were working on a major corporate IP project with a defined shelf life.
They understood the commercial assignment.
They had to. So while the passion put into the art department was absolutely real, the framework of their employment was purely commercial.
And even N.D. Stevenson, in their professional statement, acknowledged the terms of the business.
Exactly. To claim the removal is an alienation of labor fundamentally misrepresents the contractual nature of working on major studio intellectual property. The value wasn't just in the creation, it was in the successful monetization.
And when that monetization window closed,
the product's commercial life ended.
Okay, let's bring this massive deep dive to a synthesis for you, the listener. The removal of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power from Net 2026 is, it's a textbook of an expiring, unrenewed license.
It wasn't a malicious creative slight or some political conspiracy to silence a theme. It was a cold business calculus.
Based on the show failing the high bar of sustained net value add and new subscriber acquisition.
All complicated by that historical, fragmented IP ownership that stems from Mattel's past decisions.
The whole saga demonstrates the extreme volatility of streaming content, where even a critically praised show is just a disposable asset.
And it exposes the high intensity of modern fandom culture, a culture that, fueled by identity and online aggression, often refuses to reconcile the emotional value of the art with the brutal economic reality of corporate IP management.
The core truth is still there. If you want a show to stay, you have to give the platform a financial reason to renew the contract.
It's that simple.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you digest all this. We've seen how aggressively the show's creators and a segment of its fan base alienated and attacked the original audience, declaring the new content was not for them.
Right.
Now that the reboot itself is lost to limbo, what future does any controversial or niche content have in the streaming era? Should the permanence of pop culture history be determined entirely by which 7-year license deals prove profitable?
Or do IP owners have some kind of obligation to archive all iterations for future cultural study, regardless of how they performed commercially or controversially?
Something to ponder as you look through your digital subscription library. Thanks for joining the deep dive.
We'll catch you next time.